Casey, where are you from and where do you live now?
I'm from the Los Angeles area,
Okay.
and we live in Leander, Texas, which
Okay.
is about 30 minutes north of Austin.
Okay, cool. And how did you like hear about Mind Change first and end up getting involved with it?
It was a friend of a friend, and then a buddy was just telling me about his experience, and I was just really intrigued. So,
Yeah. What was it about his experience that like made you so curious?
well, there was one thing in particular. He was talking about an area of his life that I mean, I've known him for 20 years,
Yeah.
and that I know had just been a struggle for him,
Yeah.
and this work that he had done had really changed things for him in that area, and
Yeah.
where it seemed like maybe for years and years nothing else had.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And then you were telling me earlier too, I think that your wife had been interested in it too.
Yeah, and she did it before me.
Oh, she did.
Yeah, so she got the book, and we were reading the book together, and she just said, I think I want to do some sessions. I didn't even know
Yeah.
what those were, and so she's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do sessions. I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah.
And so she did, and yeah, and just seeing it sort of work in her as well, because I mean, over the years, we've been married 24 years,
Yeah.
and so we've read lots of books and
Sure.
seen different, counselors, therapists, gone to different retreats, done different things to just
Yeah.
work on our marriage or work on our lives, and so this seemed to really have an impact on her.
Yeah. What do you feel like was different about this?
I think, I mean, at a really high level, I think
Yeah.
it really got to deeper things
Yeah.
rather than like symptoms. Like I think that a lot of times the stuff that we've read or the people we've talked to are about like behavior modification and like, oh,
Yeah.
well, maybe if I can just do this a little different or this a little bit better,
Yeah.
or maybe if I could just change this thinking or something like that. But this seemed to go to more core things, like core beliefs and like about ourselves and values and things that maybe we didn't even know were connected to those same behaviors. So then you start to see the behaviors change as a result of that deeper work rather than sitting there sort of like, oh, I just need to be a little more or a little less angry or a little more patient or
Yeah.
like so I saw that as a difference in both my buddy and in my wife.
Yeah. And is that's what made you decide that you wanted to try it
Yeah,
out
and
too?
if I'm being honest, she was just like, "You really should do it." And I'm like, okay,
Yeah. Good husband.
but as usual, she was right, and yeah, and it wasn't even what I was expecting. I think
Ooh, do you remember
so
what it was you were expecting?
I was expecting something similar to what I've experienced reading lots of books and
Right.
going to a speaker seminar or even having one-on-one sessions with people.
Yeah.
I thought it would be sort of okay. Well, there's a new method here, or there's a new
Yeah.
technique, or a new
Sure.
a new thing to commit to. And if I do this way for this time, then the thing that I want will happen. And
Yeah.
it just wasn't anything close to that.
What was it like?
I mean, it was like when we first started talking, we just immediately started talking about what I felt like was just completely random things. Like we were talking about like what was your relationship like with the kids in your school, and then we started talking about my next door neighbor and a bully, and these were things that were like when I was 6 or 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm like, well, I need to figure out how to be better about my finances or eat better, get more exercise. I wouldn't have ever thought like, oh, let me think about a bully when I was 8 and how
Right.
that may have, you know, spoken some kind of truth to me
Yeah.
that I then, without even knowing it, sort of latched onto, and then I just repeated it to myself over life. Like, and if I'm telling
Yeah.
myself this thing that's not true or is negative, without even really knowing it, then it just has power over me.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really understood any of that kind of a process before that. I
Yeah.
think again, it was just a lot of like. Well, I just need to figure out how to do life better or something.
Yeah. But this was kind of like going into unexpected places and dealing with things at
Yeah.
the root. Were you doing this on your own or did you do sessions?
No, I did sessions.
Yeah. Okay. From before the session to after the session, what did you notice change?
Well, initially, the first part was total skepticism.
Yeah.
So, like when Diane, my wife, told me about it, and when I was talking to my friend, I was like, "Oh, that sounds really cool." But inside, I'm like, "Well, whatever. Okay, I guess I'll talk to this person. I'll read the book and
Yeah.
whatever." So it was just, and so the way it all sort of came together, it was very disarming, and it wasn't what I was expecting. By the time we got through our first session, I was just completely. Like I felt like I could really open sort of myself, and
Yeah.
I felt safe, and I felt like, wow, I think there's something here, and I can
Yeah.
already sort of sense that something's like shifting and moving.
Yeah. That's really cool. As things continued kind of shifting and moving, you were talking before about as you dealt with what was it, those core things, that the fruit of that was sometimes behaviors and things like that would change. Did you notice things starting to change in you as you carried forward?
Sure. I mean, I think that it started with sort of my my view of myself, and
Oh yeah.
like, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like I did all that, then I went out and I was, it was, it started with this sort of coming to realize that there were things that I had believed about myself, and I had taught myself and told myself and accepted as true, that just weren't. They weren't
Yeah.
based on, and a lot of it was irrational. Like I even had things that I hadn't thought of in years about my
Yeah.
dad, about my sister, and when I would say it out loud, having not thought about it for so long, but just
Right.
accepted it, like it was in this file cabinet somewhere, like shh, then that's done. It's like a closed
Yeah.
case. I realized, like, well, actually that's not even what happened, and I don't think that that's where he's coming from. And if I could, like in one of my sessions, uh, I was with Kent, and he was saying, well, if you could have that conversation or go back to that situation, and
Yeah.
be 15 and be in that, what was your dad feeling? And honestly, I'd never thought like that before. I never,
Yeah.
I think because when I was younger, I probably just didn't have the wherewithal to, I was probably just only thinking about myself. And then once you get the truth sort of programmed into you, you just don't go back to it.
Yeah.
So, in fact, when you do, though, a lot of times it even gets worse. Like you reprogram it worse, or I do. If I remember something that's bad, often if I remember it again, I remember it like it was worse actually. And then,
Yeah.
so
And then you found that shifted.
it started to, yeah, yeah. And again, in totally unassuming, disarming, and unexpected ways. I had a pretty good relationship with my father after I got older and was married.
Yeah.
But we had a period of probably 10 years where we were very estranged, very kind of
Yeah.
at each other. And at the core of it, I just believed that he didn't like me, and he didn't really, he couldn't love or accept who I was because I was so different than him.
Yeah.
And just going back and realizing that these things that I think I had believed were just fixed and done,
Yeah.
and like, there's no opening that back up. It's the final word has been said.
Yeah.
Having the ability to reopen that and see those things change, I think is a totally different experience. And what it did is, again, compared to books and whatever it is,
Right.
it produced a very different sort of thing. So in answer to your question, walking away from all that, I found myself thinking, well, what, with my children and my kids,
Sure.
they're 20 and 18 and 13, and, what conversation am I having right now with my daughter or my son where they're doing what I didn't realize was happening when I was younger? And how can I be more specific and intentional about creating a safe place for them to say whatever it is they're saying or feeling, or feel what you
Yeah.
feel. And whereas I think I don't even know that I was really aware or thought like that before.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's really cool. This comes up a lot when talking with people, is just how so much of it really at the core is things that we don't realize are there, but how it shifts our relationship with ourselves. And especially I've talked with a number of parents now, them sharing about just how it ends up changing because of where they're coming from. It just naturally kind of changes the kinds of interactions that they have with their kids, and there seems to be a greater sense of freedom in that and being able to connect in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel somewhat like, I feel like there's a completely different lens now. So, because I think in the past, if I would get frustrated, I could be quick to get angry
Yeah.
and lose my patience and just think
Yeah.
like, well, it's really clear whatever's happening. You're just not being logical, or stop being so emotional, or
Yeah.
like, come on, can we just like whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so I think having this totally separate lens, and maybe that's not the best way to describe it, but to see the experience that was happening right in front of me with that added sort of like, oh, wait a second, it's not just about what's actually being said. It's like what's really going on at a deeper level with my daughter, or
Yeah.
whatever it is she's acting out. Where is it coming from? And
Right.
what is that? Maybe she's presenting this sign of like, but it's coming from a place of hurt or fear or pain or whatever. And I would never have been tuned into anything like that. I would always just be
Yeah.
about the blah blah blah.
Yeah, that's such a shift, being able to like get to that shift in perspective of what's really going on underneath. Totally. Okay, you talked before about being a little bit skeptical as you were reading the book. Do you remember one of the things that you were like, wait a minute, what? I don't know about that.
Sure. I mean, there's one of them was I think Heather had said something to the effect of she had all of these sicknesses and
Yeah.
whatever it was, and she was on like, I don't even know, 100 medications, or I'm not sure, and then she went from that to like nothing and being completely well, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like how to? Because I take medication for certain things. My wife does, and I've always just sort of accepted, well, that's just, I guess, how it is, right?
Yeah.
And so, and her list, I was like, that poor person. Like,
Yeah.
like I wouldn't wish that on my enemies, like the
Right.
things that were happening.
Yeah.
But then for it to just seem like at the surface level, when you read something like that without understanding anything, it does feel a little bit like, well, my life was terrible and now it's awesome. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, I don't know.
Yeah, But then getting to like start to understand, oh, these are the mechanics by which this is happening, and how I can engage them and use them can be really, really like positively affecting.
Yeah, and in a really unexpected way, my alarm's going off. Because when you start to do it yourself, you realize that. I mean, I don't know Heather, but I would imagine all of this wasn't about her stopping doing medication. You know what I mean? Or
Right.
stopping or not having this disease or whatever it is. It wasn't about that.
Right.
That happened during it and as a result. And but I think that, when I look at a book I want to read, or I think people, when they're trying to figure out, oh, could this person help me, or this seminar, I don't know, whatever.
Right.
They look at the surface stuff, and then, and that's maybe a proof, like, oh, well, this author said she experienced whatever it was. But it's really not about that stuff.
Right.
Which can kind of almost be misleading, or you could get stuck on it.
Yeah.
And I think I was at the beginning, not stuck, but I think it was there.
Yeah.
But like I said, it didn't take long before I realized, like, that's not really what we're talking about here.
Right. You're talking about something deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you talked a little bit about what it was like doing sessions, and about how you've had really this like shift in perspective. What are some of the tools from it that you find you end up using in your day-to-day life?
A lot of it is well, it starts with an awareness that my memory is malleable or whatever that word is, right? Like it's not set in stone,
Right.
and it doesn't have to define me, like, or a core belief that I've always held on to can actually change.
Right.
And so knowing that is a start, so that's
Yeah.
good. So, but then being able to tap into that and realize, okay, well, how do I actually get at those things? And I think it's different based on if you're intentionally trying to take something and grow in it, or see it
Right.
change, versus like in a day-to-day sort of thing where something happens and you're just like, oh. So in the day-to-day kind of things, I think they talk about pattern interrupts.
Yeah.
And so I do some of those sometimes. They're pretty goofy, but
They can be.
and so sometimes just doing a little bit of it helps me sort of shake out of the situation, or feeling like I'm powerless to it. That's another thing I think, like when something would come up in the moment at work or with the kids or whatever it is. Before this, I think just defaulted to the sense that I'm powerless to it. I'm on a
Yeah.
wave here, and the
Yeah.
emotion is going, and I can't, like I'm on it. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and realizing like, okay, I'm not powerless. Actually, I don't have to be on this wave. I don't have to be pulled under. I don't have to
Yeah.
like crash. I don't. So, as far as the tools go, I think that the pattern interrupts are helpful. I think that, well, I started doing this thing called a manifesto.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
started writing out like, okay, who do I believe, you know, I believe in God. And so who do
Yeah.
I believe God made me to be? But it could just be, who do I believe I am? And who do I believe I want to be?
Yeah.
And I started to realize like the way I live is different, you know, than you know, and I would often blame it on lots of other stuff, which is sort of like
Yeah.
a victim mentality. Like,
Yeah.
well, I could be this version of myself that I want to be,
Yeah.
but all this other stuff is keeping me back. If it's my this, it's my that, or whatever
Yeah.
it is. So, so having that as a tool to kind of go back to and say, well, like if I'm living like the way I used to, I'm not going to have that sort of whole version of what I want.
Yeah.
So those are some things that.
Yeah. Has there been anything that you've done, that you've written about in your manifesto, that you've started to notice come to be in your life?
There was one really funny one.
Okay.
Our oldest daughter always wanted a cat. We never got a cat. Our youngest daughter then just decided she really wanted a cat, and so I just wrote in our manifesto like, we have a cat in our house. I don't know why. And then I just randomly one day I told Diane, and she was like, you wrote what? And she's like, oh no. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
Because you ended up getting a cat?
And now we have a cat. 'Cause she literally, and I didn't bring it up again, she literally like several weeks, maybe even a month later, came to me and she's like, I really think we should get a cat. And I was like, how, what? And, you know, okay.
All right.
I go, don't blame me. She's like, well,
She knows how powerful you are.
I don't know that it's that, but it's something though. Like,
Yeah.
and just, you know, some ways that I've approached some things at work as well.
Yeah.
Like realizing that, you know, just, I mean, it goes back to the same old stuff where you're caught in a way of thinking and you just assume that's how it is and it's sort of in a box.
Yeah.
And so because that box is there,
Yeah.
you derive some level of comfort as sort of like a secondary benefit from it.
Totally.
But it's totally not what you want. Like, so you're like,
Right.
I'm getting just a little bit of this because at least I know the rules.
Right.
But what I really want is no box, and I
Yeah.
want to achieve and I want to get to where I want to go.
Yeah.
But that actually it takes away that secondary comfort and it introduces a lot of risk and fear and
Yeah.
doubt, because to get that, I
Right.
have to believe like, oh my gosh, I actually could do that. I'm worth it or whatever. And I've definitely been much more on that path since the sessions and reading the book, and I see, you know, doors opening at work because of it, and
That's really
so.
cool. That's really cool. Excuse me. There was one more thing I wanted to ask you. Oh, you had mentioned before that you believe in God, and this idea of like looking at, okay, how do I think God sees me? And like, do my beliefs align with that? What's that been like, and how it's affected your view of God and how you see yourself through that lens?
I think, you know, I mean, so like, I mean, I believe that the version of life that I subscribe to is
Yeah.
that Jesus died and was resurrected and then lived so that I can have this sort of full life.
Yeah.
But that always sounded like a sort of religious concept, I think.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's work that you need to do in pursuing that, in prayer and in reading your Bible and fellowship, whatever, right? I think that mind change and things like mind change, like there's these tools that we have to deal with other parts of us that I think that inform all of that,
Yeah.
but that deal with it at just a different level. So for me, I feel like there was and still like I'm you know, I'm working on it. Like I had core beliefs that I think made me believe that I wasn't really whole, I guess.
Yeah.
So if, and if the idea is I want to live life to the full, and
Yeah.
God wants to, fill me up with whatever that great life is,
Yeah.
if I'm a busted cup, He's going to pour it in, and it's going to go everywhere, and so I wouldn't be able to hold on to it,
Yeah.
or I do something and then feel like I'm still powerless, or I'm not changing, or
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of people can feel like that, like when they think,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'm going to follow God and I'm going to do this, but then why do I still struggle with fill in the blank?
Sure.
And so I think that as a part of that, there is a wholeness that I think God really wants for us. Like He sees us and keeps us in wholeness, I think. And when I pray about that, I think, I imagine like a whole Casey. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I want that, and I work
Yeah.
towards that. And I think that in that wholeness, God can give me a full life and fill me up.
Yeah.
And I don't really know that I, at a practical level, knew maybe how to do that, because again, I just had all of these preconceived things that I just thought were already set. And so being able to reopen stuff with my father, with my even, feeling when I was young, I was overweight, and, feeling like, oh, I can't ever really be fit or athletic, or,
Yeah.
and these things I carry around with me. And even now I still struggle with that. And I need to work on that. But believing like with this tool, that I can actually have a hope of being made whole, or living a much more whole life.
Yeah.
And then have that sort of, because I believe God's always wanting to bless us and give us things,
Yeah.
like beyond our asking, beyond our ability to even understand. Like his divine blessing is like compared to like what we're like, give me a job or give me a car. God's like, I'm gonna whoosh, right? But I just couldn't even see it or grasp it. And
Yeah.
so I think that I'm not, I still have a lot of work to do, but
But there's this sense now of what it is like, being able to connect more with that sense of wholeness.
yeah, like I really want that. And my wife talks about that a lot. She's really great about that. And she talks about like with our kids, she says, when I think about them, I think about holding them in a place of wholeness. And then when I'm talking to them or working on whatever it is we are trying to help them, I come from that place. So it's not just like even me trying to do mom's thing, right? Or do what's right. It's what needs to happen so that my kids can actually, in their own person and themselves, be in that state of wholeness from a young age.
That's beautiful, Casey. Yeah, thank you. Casey, you were talking about how you and your wife were reading the Mind Change book together, and how she did some sessions and you decided to do some, and it seemed to be like kind of become a part of your relationship. I'm curious, how has it affected your relationship with one another?
Well, to be clear, she read it, and then I started to kind of read it, and I think if she had her way, I would have read it sooner, and been more, into it.
Yeah.
So if anything, at the beginning, it may have even been a little bit of an obstacle, like because maybe I was obstinate, and maybe and I think I even made her feel a little bit like, like it, either I didn't believe it, or something to the effect that would communicate that maybe I wasn't as supportive as maybe she would have wanted.
Okay.
And so I think that then going through it and talking about it, and I think it's really helped us realize in moments where we might be having friction, or be sort of like hitting heads together, that there's probably more going on.
Yeah.
Like we used to have the saying when we were young about if you crack an egg over a hot pan, it's just going to immediately like versus if you crack it over like a cold pan that hasn't been heated, it just kind of hits and just falls off.
Right.
And so we would, sometimes things would happen, and we would say, I think your pan's kind of hot, because it's just because life is constantly cracking eggs on us, right? And so I think it was a reminder at a deeper level to realize, like, okay, we both have a lot of core beliefs about ourselves, but I think we have core beliefs about each other, and we need to figure out how to create a space where we can talk about those.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have a long way to go, and it's mostly me. Like I can be pretty, I can isolate, and I can want to just sort of listen and go, but not really engage.
Yeah.
And I know that affects her, and I know she needs to feel that engagement and that support. But I don't even know, honestly, that I would have totally that it would have been like a light going off before. I think I would always just be
Right.
thinking like, why are you talking so much? Can we just like, eat a pizza and have sex?
Yeah.
Not that, I've ever said that before.
That's great. But I love to, there's this sense though of like, oh, okay, like you were saying before, this greater sense of connecting to yourself in all of your relationships with other people. It's like it affects the kind of space that you're able to hold with them, that you're able to create with them, and that kind of keeps developing, it keeps growing.
Yeah, and she's been really good about proactively doing that. Like I feel like even recently, there's been multiple instances where we've been having a conversation that could have in the past been potentially difficult
Yeah.
because it was about sensitive subjects that have been hard for us in the past,
Yeah.
say. But I can tell that she's actually putting this forward and creating a sort of a space where, okay, we're just going to be safe right now,
Yeah.
and how do you know? Like that's always the thing, And
Right. How do you know?
it's like, well, I feel blah blah blah. Well, how do you know? And I'm like, oh, don't do that. And she's like, no. How do you know? And
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay. I feel really mad. Or where do
Yeah.
where is that? Where do you feel mad? And and I want to be better about that, and I know it would really help her. And again, I have a lot that I need to grow in, but when we've been able to, and when I've opened myself up to her doing it, it's really changed things. Like versus in the past, I think we would have just really felt like we were taking things personally, and we're hurting each
Yeah.
other, or like, well, I just don't even want to talk and get up and leave, and
There's a
and
greater
then
sense of being able to engage.
yeah.
Yeah.
And feeling like, and then even feeling like, okay, I can actually say the thing that maybe I'd be scared to say.
Yeah. Wow.
That
There's a
will-
lot of power in that.
Where I would feel like, okay, if I say what I really think and feel, it's going to actually turn her away. And there's been times when she's been able to like really just let what needs to be said above and beyond how she's taking it or how she's feeling about it.
Yeah.
And which completely transforms our ability to communicate. So that makes me want to do that more. I'm not as good as she is, but we're together. I mean, it's helped us a lot. Like I
Yeah.
mean, we're very different in that now.
That's really cool. Casey, what are you most proud of yourself for in this work?
I think believing that I am worth being loved and taking the time to be known and for being valued for who I really am, and being re-engaged with this sort of core me that I think
Yeah.
was just covered for such a long time with who I thought I had to be for work or for my friends or for whatever it is, and realizing like God made me Casey, and that's good, and so how do I be the most Casey I can be? And actually I get to do that, like to feel like an invitation back into that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I've for such a long time just felt like, well, I gotta just be the best dad. I need to be the best worker. I need to be the whatever. And actually I think the best thing I can do for the people in my life is be the best Casey,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, right at the core. That's beautiful. Thank you so much
Sure.
for taking the time and sharing with us. Really appreciate your perspective and your insights. I'm taking away some extra little nuggets from that, so really appreciate it. Thank you, Casey.
Thanks for having me.